The current issue between Hong Kong and China can be traced back to the two Opium Wars between 1839 and 1856. This resulted in what was referred to by the Chinese as a century of humiliation, where China lost its wealth and standing as the most powerful force in Asia. President Xi Jinping described that page of Chinese history as one of humiliation and sorrow. Essentially, to correct its trade imbalance with China in the early 1800s, Britain significantly increased opium imports to China. To sustain an increased demand for opium, addiction levels were turned up. Now, this caused serious social and economic disruption in China. Even the imperial soldiers were addicted. The government made it illegal to possess or consume opium. In spite of this, illicit trade in opium continued to rise. In 1839, British warships destroyed a Chinese blockade. Now, this started the First Opium War. It ended in August of 1842 with the signing of the Treaty of Nanjing, where Hong Kong Island was ceded to the British. This was in August of 1842. The Second Opium War started in 1856, when the British sought to increase its trading rights. It ended in 1860, the war, with the capture of Beijing and the signing of a convention where much of Kowloon was ceded to the British. Now, to ensure greater certainty and security for its trading interests, on July 1st, 1898, an agreement was signed for Hong Kong and most of Kowloon to be leased to the British for a total of 99 years. That is, to be returned to China only on the 1st of July, 1997. As that deadline neared, Britain decided that it would negotiate an agreement to lay out the terms of the handover. This resulted in the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984. This is a very, very important turning point and something that constantly gets referred to, the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984. It was signed by ex-British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and her Chinese counterpart, Premier Zhao Ziyang. It outlined the principle of one country, two systems, where Hong Kong would retain a high degree of autonomy and freedom of speech. It also stated that Hong Kong's legal and judicial system would remain unchanged for 50 years. That is, until 2047. The declaration was deposited with the United Nations. The one country, two systems principle was enshrined in a document called the Basic Law, which is considered Hong Kong's mini constitution, the Basic Law. The high degree of autonomy that Beijing pledged to grant Hong Kong has been a thorny subject since the 1997 handover. The issue was further exacerbated in June 2014 when the Chinese State Council released a white paper stating that Beijing had, quote, comprehensive jurisdiction, unquote, over Hong Kong. Now, this led to the umbrella movement of 2014, where tens of thousands of protesters, mainly students, took to the streets demanding universal suffrage. In August of 2014, Beijing proposed that all eligible voters could vote in 2017 to elect Hong Kong's chief executive. The condition, however, was that a 1,200-person nominating committee would pick the 2 to 3 candidates. Now, this was rejected by the pro-democracy activists as they saw most of the members of the committee being closely aligned with Beijing. The protesters failed to achieve what they demanded. Carrie Lam was elected chief executive in 2017 by the same committee of 1,200 people as in past contests. On the 3rd of April 2019, the Carrie Lam government proposed changes to legislation that would allow for criminal suspects to be extradited to China. Critics warned that this extradition bill has the potential to undermine Hong Kong's legal freedoms and intimidate or silence dissidents. Hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets, many for the first time, including civil servants. On the 1st of July 2019, the anniversary of the handing over of Hong Kong to China, protesters stormed the Legislative Council building and vandalized it. Beijing accused the USA and Britain of stoking tensions in the city. On the 21st of July, protesters defaced China's liaison office in Hong Kong. China warned the protesters not to play with fire and not to mistake restraint for weakness. There were violent clashes between the protesters and the police. On the 12th of August 2019, protesters occupied the airport terminal, leading to hundreds of flights being cancelled. On the 4th of September, Carrie Lam announced she would withdraw the extradition bill, but it was seen as being too late and too little. After a few months of calm, on the 30th of June 2020, on the eve of the handover of Hong Kong, China passed a wide-ranging national security law, making it easier to punish protesters and silence dissidents. Pro-democracy activists say it curtails freedom of speech and is an insult to Hong Kong's basic law. China insists it's aimed at returning stability to a country tainted with foreign ideals. The national security law has had a chilling effect on the ground, especially for activists and pro-democracy players. Those found guilty will not be allowed to stand for public office. The new security office in Hong Kong, with its own Beijing-appointed enforcement personnel, can send cases to be tried in mainland China. People suspected of breaking the law can be wiretapped and put under surveillance. On June the 15th, 2020, US President Trump orders an end to Hong Kong's special status. On November 11th, 2020, Hong Kong expels 4 opposition legislators after Beijing passes a resolution allowing this. The following day, the remaining 15 opposition members resign in protest from the 70-seat Legislative Council. In January of 2021, more than 50 pro-democracy activists are arrested on suspicion of breaking the national security law. On March 30th, 2021, China finalizes an overhaul of Hong Kong's electoral system to ensure only patriots, as defined by China, rule the city. In June 17, 2021, authorities raided the premises of the pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily as part of a national security investigation. A week later, Apple Daily prints its last edition. US President Joe Biden calls the closure a sad day for media freedom. So much has happened in a short space of time. Are we seeing the beginning of the end of Hong Kong? Or are we seeing the beginning of a new Hong Kong? Are China's actions on Hong Kong illegal, unethical, or is China acting within its sovereign right? Realistically, what are the options for Hong Kong going forward?